Welcome to episode 2 of the Critical Coach podcast. I'm still waiting on approval from iTunes, Spotify, and Deezer. So for now, I'll continue to post new episodes on social media, and you'll still be able to find them at the top of their respective article on the website. In this episode, we're going to build on what we covered in part 1 by looking at how to collect information about new clients via interview. And if you check the description, there's a free interview template for you guys to use. So here we go. Coding and Coaching Part 2, the interview. In Part 1, we looked at how systematic processes can help us become better problem solvers and began to develop a process of our own. So far, we know what outcome we want, what problems must be solved to achieve that outcome, and what information is required to solve those problems. Our outcome is to create a training program that guides the application of stress to achieve the client's goals. The problems we need to solve are: what are the client's goals, what adaptations are necessary to achieve those goals, and how should stress be applied to achieve those adaptations. The information we need to solve those problems relates to the client's goals, training preferences, obstacles, and advantages. Now we're going to look at how that information is gathered. How you collect the information necessary for your training program will be affected by your specific circumstances. Do you work in a large Globo gym or a smaller private gym? Are you coaching via the internet? How much time do you have to collect information? Rather than try to cover every eventuality, I'm going to outline my own process for collecting information. I'll leave it to you to decide what you can and can't use and to adapt my process to your circumstances. There's 2 stages to that process, an interview and a physical screening, which I'll refer to as the collection phase. Completing both stages takes about an hour. Now, I realize that much time is a luxury for many coaches, but from that hour, you can get a lot of useful information. The interview serves 2 purposes: to develop rapport and collect information. I'm at a loss when it comes to understanding and responding to other people's emotions, so I'm not very good at the people side of coaching. Therefore, my advice on developing rapport is simple: be honest, be engaged, be sincere. If I don't know how to help someone, I'll tell them. If I know someone who can, I'll refer the client to that person. Being engaged means putting your phone away. Don't have it nearby, don't have it on silent. Someone's coming to you for help and they're probably paying for it. The only thing on your mind should be the person in front of you. What do they want? What do they need? How can you help them get both? Now, I understand that many coaches depend on their phone to manage appointments and short notice cancellations. However, I don't think that justifies distraction. Instead, it necessitates good scheduling and a robust cancellation policy. For example, cancellations that occur within 24 hours of the scheduled session must be paid for or aren't refunded, whatever works with your payment policy. To manage new appointments, add a break between one session and the next. Use that time to respond to text messages and return calls. Sincerity boils down to saying what you mean and meaning what you say. If you think that sounds synonymous with honesty, you're right. Lay your cards on the table and let the client decide if they want to play. If they do, it'll make for a better relationship. I'll say it again. Be honest, be engaged, be sincere. Obtaining information through interview is a skill in its own right. You need to direct the conversation towards certain subjects, but let the conversation flow once you're there. This creates opportunities for the client to tell you something you hadn't thought to ask about. If you control the conversation too tightly, you miss out on those opportunities and potentially useful information. An example of good interview technique is: have you had any injuries? What can you tell me about them? The first question is a closed question requiring a yes or no answer. It directs the conversation towards the subject of injury. The second question is open. A yes or no answer doesn't work. Instead, I'm asking the client to tell me a story about their injury history in their own words. Asking an open question prompts the client to think and remember before answering. An example of bad interview technique is, have you ever injured your ankles? This is a closed question that requires a yes or no answer. It directs the conversation towards the subject of injury, but also narrows the scope of inquiry. As a consequence, you'll only learn of the injuries you ask about. Using this technique to get the same client's injury history would require a long list of yes or no questions. This approach wastes time and makes a coach look incompetent. From the client's perspective, it's analogous to someone reading a speech without looking at their audience. It looks like you don't know your shit, except you're speaking to an audience of one and there's nowhere to hide. Getting back to the good example, make a note of any injuries they do mention, then get more information in a conversational manner. For example, the coach asks, have you had any injuries? Client responds, yes. So the coach asks, what can you tell me about them? The client answers, last year I had my left ankle reconstructed. Apparently I'd rolled it so many times playing football that the whole joint became loose. The coach asks, how's the ankle now? The client responds, it's all right, but I don't play football anymore. I go for a walk with some friends at lunchtime, and that's about it. That brief snippet of conversation has yielded valuable information and prompts the coach to get more specific information about some of the points raised. The information that was collected is that the client has a history of repeated left ankle injury, they've had recent surgery, have some experience playing football, and conduct limited physical activity. That information also hints at a list of follow-up questions, like was the ankle injured due to balance issues, that is, poor coordination and proprioception? Was there rehabilitation after surgery? And if there was, how confident is the client with that rehabilitation process? Was full range of motion restored to the ankle? How confident is the client with regard to the ankle? Are they protective of it? For how long did the client play football? Why did they stop playing football? And if they stopped because of the injury, was it out of fear of further injury, pain, or something else? There's a lot to work with there, and we're just getting started. The coach could have asked whether the client is still receiving treatment, whether that be physiotherapy, soft tissue therapy, etc. The coach could have asked about other injuries or other sports the client played. Those questions open the door to yet more information and more lines of inquiry. Then the challenge becomes knowing when you've got enough information to change the subject. Discussing every topic exhaustively results in very long interviews. Long interviews aren't necessarily bad, but most coaches simply don't have the time. Furthermore, it's a hard sell to the client. If you can make it work, go for it. Knowledge is power. But for the rest of us, we need to be judicious in how we steer the conversation. The client's goals are your reference point for directing the interview. When a point is raised by the client, you need to consider it in the context of those goals. Will it have a significant impact on the adaptations the client requires and how you'll apply stress to achieve those adaptations? If it will, spend some time discussing that point and collecting information. If it won't, move on to something else. Making the right decision is the product of experience and reflection upon that experience. If you can, discuss your decisions with other coaches. They might notice something you've missed. Now that we understand how to direct the conversation and probe for more information, let's look at where we want to direct the conversation. At the end of part 1, I listed the information we're after: goals, obstacles, advantages, and training preferences. Some of that information, like goals and training preferences, can be gained through direct questions. For example, what are your goals and how often can you train? However, obstacles and advantages are context dependent, and we won't have that context until after the collection phase, that is, the interview and screening, are completed. For example, if a client wants to learn Olympic weightlifting, prior experience could be an obstacle or an advantage. If that experience taught them bad squat mechanics, it's an obstacle. If it taught them good squat mechanics, it's an advantage. But you won't know until after the screening. For now, cast a wide net that covers multiple topics, like goals and motivation, training preferences, current activity levels, training history, food habits and nutrition, and current and previous injuries and medical conditions. I'm about to give some brief overviews of the topics I just listed. I've included any specific questions I use, but for the most part, the client's answers should be used to develop lines of inquiry within each topic. I've also uploaded a template you can use for your own interviews with a link in the description. Goals and motivation. This is the easiest part of the collection phase. What goals does your client want to achieve? Why do they want those goals? The first question tells you what they want. The second question tells you why they want it. The why part is crucial because it provides a tool to motivate the client. The training program is your plan to achieve what they want. If motivation becomes an issue, refer the client to why they wanted their goals in the first place. Now, take a moment to consider the client's goals in their own words. For example, a client might say that they want to lose weight. However, losing weight isn't the same as losing fat. If that client weighs themselves after a month of training and realizes they're heavier, they may confuse increased muscle mass, that is weight, with increased body fat. For your sake and theirs, help them to accurately define their goals and be prepared to manage their expectations. Lastly, ask the client what they think will get in the way of their goals. They might come up with something you hadn't thought of, or you might discover that they haven't considered the idea at all. Mine their response for useful information and further lines of inquiry. Training preferences. Training preferences relate to a client's availability to train and tasks they enjoy. How many days a week do they want to train? How long can they train for on those days? Their answers will determine how many days you program for and affect the amount of work in a training session. Depending on the client's goals, their availability might be insufficient to achieve them. Will the client be doing PT, that is, personal training? If they're not doing PT, when are they training and on what days, at what times? If a client is only doing PT, that makes your job much easier. You still need to develop a training program, but can adjust it on the fly in response to the client's performance. If the client is doing a mixture of PT and solo training, your program will need to be more robust. However, you will have occasional opportunities to optimize your program during their training cycle. If the client won't be doing PT, you need to have an outstanding training program. Furthermore, you need to know when they'll be training and on what days. If you won't be in the gym during those times or will be unavailable, the client will depend on other coaches for help. It's your responsibility to ensure the client won't be abandoned while they're training, so make sure you know the other coaches on staff. The success of your program may depend on the advice they provide when you're not around. Knowing what sports and/or exercises the client enjoys creates an opportunity to use them in your training program and make their training more enjoyable. While this isn't an issue for some, it can be invaluable for clients who struggle with motivation or clients doing less exciting work as part of rehabilitation. Try to give them something to look forward to. Current activity levels. Current activity levels relate to what the client does over the course of a week or two. That includes what they do at work, what they do at home, and whatever else they do with their free time. Their responses can provide valuable information about potential work capacity, fatigue levels they bring to training, and activities that may delay or accelerate recovery between training sessions. Training history. Training history refers to prior experience of physical training. That could be in a gym as part of sport or both. If they have some form of training history, you want to know what it was, what the client thought of it, and what effect they got out of it. As mentioned earlier, prior experience can be an obstacle or an advantage. Food habits/nutrition. How you prioritize a client's nutrition will be heavily dependent on their goals. Having a brief and general discussion about the client's approach to food is a good start. Do they pay attention to what they eat? If they do, why and what choices do they make? The goal here is not to create a detailed record of their dietary habits. Instead, the goal is to determine whether the subject of nutrition needs to be discussed in greater detail at another time. Current/previous injuries and medical conditions. This topic deals almost exclusively with obstacles. The client's answers may necessitate medical clearance prior to training and/or collaboration with healthcare providers prior to writing their training program. For past injuries, you need to determine whether there are long-term or permanent effects that could alter your approach to training them. There may also be lingering effects that need to be resolved, like lack of confidence with the injured area or scar adhesions. For the latter, refer them to a medical clinician to see if these can be resolved. For current injuries, Determine whether the client is receiving treatment, what that treatment is, and who it's with. If they're not receiving treatment, find out why and consider referring them to a clinician. If they are receiving treatment, make contact with their healthcare provider and develop a training program that works with their efforts. The bottom line with injuries is this: if in doubt, refer out. Talk to other coaches and seek advice from medical clinicians that you trust. If you don't know any, start building a network. Now, before we wrap up, I mentioned that the topic of injuries and medical conditions deals almost exclusively with obstacles. I say almost because sometimes the rehabilitative process creates advantages through the development of skills. Coordination and proprioception are the first that come to mind. From my own experience with rehabilitation and that of my clients, treatment, which includes a focus on motor learning, usually brings with it improved body awareness, that's proprioception, and control, that's coordination. If that is the case, it's an advantage that can be exploited during the programming phase. At this point, we've looked at the first half of the collection phase, the interview. The interview serves two purposes: to develop rapport and collect information. I've uploaded a template you can use for your own interviews with a link in the description. Rapport is crucial to developing a trusting relationship with any new client. To assist in developing rapport, it's important that we're honest, engaged, and sincere. In order to collect information effectively during the interview, we need to consider how it's conducted, that is, our technique, and what topics we want to cover, like goals and motivation, training preferences, current activity levels, training history, food habits/nutrition, and current/previous injuries and medical conditions. The information gathered during the interview will be used to solve our three problems, which are: what are the client's goals, what adaptations are necessary to achieve those goals, and how should stress be applied to achieve those adaptations. Solving those problems is necessary to achieve the outcome we want, which is to create a training program that guides the application of stress to achieve the client's goals. In part 3, we'll finish the collection phase by looking at the screening process. Thanks for listening. If you've got any questions or comments, you can find me on Twitter at critical_coach, on Facebook at The Critical Coach, all one word, and on Instagram as the_critical_coach.